Volksgenossen und Genossinnen, meine deutschen Arbeiter. Ich bin aus euch selbst herausgewachsen, bin einst selbst unter euch gestanden, bin in 4,5 Jahren Krieg wieder mitten unter euch gewesen.
Tolerance is often led by fear. Fear.
This 6-word definition is a starting point to how Germany was and how our life at school is a tolerant society politically, economically, and socially. During World War II in Germany, their society became intolerant politically because the Germans feared that if they did not support the Nazis and Hitler, their life would end, just as the Jews' lives did. Otherwise meaning it was better to be for Hitler instead of against him. Tolerance was led by fear because if the Germans did turn against Hitler, they would be executed or sent to the concentration camps with anyone who wasn't 100% German. They allowed the Nazis to run the Jews out of their homes, away from their family, and thrown in a lion's den, barely having a chance to survive. The Germans allowed Hitler to be in power and create his Aryan race because they feared being outcast and the consequences that came with it. For example, the quote, "If the only person sitting with us is the bully, then it's better than nothing." This can apply as Hitler being the bully and the Nazis and Germans being the bystanders.
What factors contribute to voting for the next student council?
Honestly, I feel like people that have, like, popularity plays a major role in the voting, and also like promises that people make even if they aren't able to fulfill them, I feel like, and the connections that they have.
What factors do you think contribute to voting for a good student council?
A good student council representative has to be willing to put in the work, willing to put in, the effort and the commitment around school. If we're talking about tolerance, they have to be, open to everyone's opinions, everyone's discussions, be willing to hear everything before they make a decision.
What factors contribute to voting for the next student council?
I think some of the factors for contributing for the next student council is solely based on popularity and who you actually know. Because if you were to think about it, like if you had a person that was running and then if you knew them per se, and you knew them and you had connections with them, and they're so called in this popular group or in this high social ranking, then you will most likely choose for them. So I don't think that student council or like student elections are solely based on like who's going to do good, but rather based on promises that are not necessarily going to be given in the future, and kind of in that moment of who you're going to choose, and also as well as the connections in the popularity.
When the Germans became upset with the lack of involvement people had in investing into their businesses, the Jewish societies became tolerant of the Germans closing down their department stores and ruining almost all of their businesses. After the Germans became infuriated with the people purchasing and investing their monies into the local Jewish stores, they made it seem like the Jewish stores were the reasons for people's lack of interest.
Why do you think we tolerate students who disrespect school property as well as resources?
Because students are still young, and I feel like they still have time to grow, and if you don't teach them, then they won't get better. So you have to tolerate them in order for them to become better students overall. That was a bad answer.
I think we tolerate students who disrespect school property or resources. For example, the calculators.
Are you recording right now? Okay. I think that students tolerate students who disrespect school property because that you're not physically buying anything yourself, so you don't realize that the funds that are coming out of the school budget are what are buying the calculators or the pencils or what have you. And so since it's not directly coming out of your pocket, you don't realize exactly the effect of your actions and how you're being disrespectful to school property.
Wait, Why do you think that students tolerate the bad students when they disrespect school property or resources?
It's fear. They don't want to get in the way. They don't want that attention turned on them. So they're self-conscious, they're insecure, and underlies that is a fear. They just are afraid to step up. And we have to help people with that. We have to help them feel more confident, and we have to let them know that we're going to back them up and when we demand for people to do the right thing.
A society truly becomes intolerant when it loses control. It often loses control when that society becomes fearful of something better than them. Once a society becomes fearful, it's bound to deteriorate from an outside force. The Jews were one of those societies that became tolerant to the Germans and their harsh ways. People were drawn out of their homes out of force. No one spoke up. And the Jews were manipulated to thinking that they would start a new life somewhere. For example, Weasel's family was originally transferred to the ghettos, and then it got manipulated to thinking that they would work in brick factories, when rather individuals were categorized to whether they were healthy to work or whether they would die most likely in a crematorium. The Jews became tolerant of the Nazis and German rule. No one decided to speak up because one became fearful for their life if they did. The Jews didn't tolerate the Nazis out of choice, but out of fear that they would die. The Jews were seen as outcasts, and Germans intended to make them outcasts. Laws were created specifically to oppress Jews, and also known as the Nuremberg race laws. Under these laws, Jews had the right to display Jewish colors and affiliation. But no Jew in their right mind would want to do that because the Nazis would take possession of them and either kill them or put them into forced labor in concentration camps. Therefore, tolerance is often led by fear. And once the Jews become fearful for their lives, they start to comply to the Nazi rule.
Why do you think students become tolerant of bad teachers as well as other students?
I think students become tolerant of bad teachers because even though they don't necessarily agree with their way of teaching, teachers and education are a student's way to succeed and make their life into what they want. So students have to tolerate them in order to succeed.
And what about students?
Students tolerating other students?
And students tolerating bad students. Why?
I don't think students tolerate bad other students because that's how fights break out and stuff. So.
Why do you think students become tolerant of bad teachers as well as students?
I don't think students actually become tolerant. They actually stay intolerant towards them. They act like they're tolerant, but they actually are. They rebel against the teacher in their own different ways, and they never actually tolerate that teacher.
Okay, then replace that teacher as if it were a student. Why do you think students tolerate bad students, basically?
It's because they're either forced to, or they're in their friend group, whether they're their friends, they're forced to tolerate them, and if they're not forced to tolerate them, then they're just going to be intolerant towards them. They're not going to talk to them, not going to do anything towards them, call them names, bully them even.
So would you say that fear is a contributing factor to students tolerating bad students?
I think it is, because if you fear a student or teacher, then you will become tolerant towards them because you don't want any threats they make to become a reality.
Why do you think people tolerate bad students as well as bad teachers that mistreat them in a bad way?
I think again, it's fear, but I also think it's not thinking you have a voice. We have to teach children how to have a voice, how to disagree, how to pose difficult questions in class. We also have to teach children to stand up for what they want, and we have to be very mindful and very encouraging of teaching people to have a big voice. You guys have great voices, and you got to use them.
In the end, one can justify anything so long as there is evidence. No one is responsible for what people choose to do with their lives. All one can do is to try and guide or be there for one another. For a change to occur, you have to want that change and the drive to not stop till you reach your end goal. This world needs to stop tolerating unacceptable behavior and stop fearing what others may think of them, but what they think of themselves.